When my wife cheated on me, she called me boring. And when we divorced and split everything 50-50, she demanded that I pay child support for her new children and her new husband. 13 years ago, my life shattered into pieces. I was married to Sarah, and while we had our share of ups and downs, I thought we had a solid relationship. But you never really know someone, do you? It all began with a lie. I'll never forget the moment I discovered Sarah had been cheating on me. It wasn't one of those dramatic Hollywood-style confessions where she came clean out of guilt or love for me. Nope, I found out by accident. A text from a guy named Brandon popped up on her phone while she was in the shower. At first, I thought, maybe it's work-related. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It wasn't work-related. The text was explicit. So explicit that I can still feel my stomach twist just thinking about it. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that this had been going on for months, right under my nose. When I confronted Sarah, she didn't deny it. Instead, she turned it around on me. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere, she spat. Boring? I worked 60-hour weeks to provide for us and our two kids, Emma and Alex, while she spent her days finding herself at yoga classes and coffee dates. But sure, blame me. The divorce that followed was messy, to say the least. Sarah wanted to play hardball, pushing for sole custody of the kids, claiming I wasn't emotionally present enough. But I wasn't about to roll over. I love my kids more than anything, and the thought of losing them made me fight like hell. After a grueling court battle, we finally settled on a 50-50 custody arrangement. Emma was 7, and Alex was 5 at the time. We agreed to split expenses evenly, which sounded fair in theory. In practice, it became a logistical nightmare. Sarah was always forgetting her half of the school fees or insisting that the kids needed expensive clothes and extracurriculars. I'd often cave just to keep the peace. Looking back, I realized she was still manipulating me, just in a different way. At first, the kids seemed to adjust well enough. Emma, my little bookworm, threw herself into her stories and schoolwork. Alex, always the more energetic one, found an outlet in sports. But as they grew older, I noticed subtle changes. Emma became quieter, more withdrawn. Alex started acting out, getting into fights at school. I blamed myself. Was the divorce too hard on them? Did I not do enough to make them feel secure? Sarah, of course, blamed me too, which didn't help my already spiraling guilt. Around this time, I met Lauren. She was a coworker at the tech firm where I worked, a single mom with a teenage son, Ethan. We bonded over shared war stories of divorce and co-parenting. Unlike Sarah, Lauren was calm, steady, and empathetic. She didn't play mind games or make me feel inadequate. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Our relationship developed slowly. I was cautious about introducing her to Emma and Alex, but when I finally did, they adored her. Emma would chat with Lauren for hours about her favorite books, while Alex loved playing video games with Ethan. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to think, maybe this could work. Then came the bombshell. One night, while the kids were staying with Sarah, I got a frantic call from Emma. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Dad, you have to come. Please. I drove over immediately. When Sarah answered the door, she looked annoyed. They're fine, she said, rolling her eyes. But Emma wasn't fine. She was sitting on the couch, hugging her knees, while Alex stood nearby, glaring at Sarah. What happened? I demanded. Emma hesitated before blurting out, Mom had Brandon over. They were doing things. My blood ran cold. Brandon. The same guy from all those years ago. Are you serious? I asked Sarah, who just shrugged. They're old enough to understand that adults have relationships, she said, as if that justified anything. I took Emma and Alex home with me that night, fuming. How could she be so careless, so selfish? The incident triggered a new wave of tension between Sarah and me. I considered going back to court for sole custody, but the thought of dragging the kids through another legal battle made me hesitate. Instead, I tried to focus on being the best dad I could be. But Sarah wasn't done causing chaos. She began telling Emma and Alex that Lauren was replacing her, planting seeds of resentment. It worked, to some extent. Emma became distant from Lauren, and Alex started picking fights with Ethan. It felt like everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild was crumbling. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "You don't know the whole story." At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Who sent the letter? What didn't I know? I tried to brush it off, but the unease lingered. And then, another bombshell dropped. Sarah announced she was moving out of state with Brandon and wanted to take the kids with her. If there's one thing I've always been sure of, it's that I wanted to give Emma and Alex a solid future. No matter how messy things got with Sarah, or how chaotic life became, I wanted them to have opportunities one never had. It's funny, when you're young and single, you think about saving for cars, vacations, or gadgets. But the moment you become a parent, all of that shifts. Every dollar I set aside was for their education or their future, even if it meant sacrifices along the way. When Emma was born, I started putting away small amounts, just 20 or 30 bucks here and there. Back then, money was tight. Sarah and I were living paycheck to paycheck, and anything extra usually went toward household bills. But once Alex came along, I realized I had to do more. The thought of them struggling to afford college, or not having a safety net if they needed it, kept me awake at night. Life has a strange way of throwing curveballs, though. About 9 years ago, I was working in construction. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and had decent benefits. One day, while lifting a steel beam, I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my back. At first, I thought it was just a pulled muscle, but by the next morning, I couldn't stand up straight without feeling like my spine was on fire. Turns out, I'd herniated 2 discs. The injury meant I was out of work for months, and while workers' comp helped cover some costs, the real relief came when the company settled the lawsuit. I was awarded $250,000 in compensation. It felt surreal, like winning the lottery, only the ticket came with a lifetime of back pain. I could have used the money to splurge on myself. God knows I'd earned it after all those years of busting my ass. But instead, I invested most of it into accounts for Emma and Alex. About $200,000 went straight into college funds and savings accounts, locked away until they turned 18. The rest I used to pay down debts and get ahead on bills. Around the same time, my Aunt Margaret passed away. She wasn't particularly close to anyone in the family, but she'd always had a soft spot for me. I remember visiting her as a kid and sitting on her porch, sipping lemonade while she told me stories about her childhood. When her lawyer contacted me about the inheritance, I was shocked. She'd left me $150,000. Just like the settlement, I funneled almost all of it into the kids' funds. By this point, I felt like I was finally making progress. Between the inheritance, the settlement, and my regular savings, Emma and Alex had a solid financial cushion. I didn't tell Sarah about the exact amounts, mostly because I didn't trust her not to try and find a way to dip into it. She was good at spending money, not saving it. Things were going well until one day, I noticed something odd. I was reviewing the kids' accounts online when I saw a series of withdrawals. They weren't huge amounts, just $500 here, $1,000 there. But they added up. My heart dropped. These accounts were supposed to be untouchable until the kids turned 18. How was this happening? I called the bank immediately, and after an agonizing hour on hold, I was connected with a fraud investigator. They confirmed my worst fear. Someone had been accessing the accounts using forged documentation. The withdrawals had been made over several months, all routed to an unknown account. I felt sick. Who would do this? My mind immediately went to Sarah, but it didn't make sense. She didn't have access to these accounts, or so I thought. The investigator suggested filing a police report, which I did that same day. As the investigation unfolded, another bombshell dropped. A man named Greg, who worked at the bank, had been the one facilitating the fraudulent withdrawals. He'd been dating someone who claimed to be my representative and had approved the transfers without proper verification. When I pressed for details, I learned that this representative was none other than Sarah's sister, Rachel. Rachel and I had never gotten along. She was the type of person who thrived on drama and always had a shady boyfriend or two in the picture. It didn't surprise me that she was involved, but it hurt to realize how deep this betrayal ran. Sarah, of course, denied knowing anything about it. Rachel does what she wants, she said with a shrug. as if that absolved her of any responsibility. The police eventually recovered about $60,000 of the stolen money, but the rest was gone, blown on God knows what. I tried to stay calm for the kids, but inside, I was fuming. That money was meant for their future, and now a chunk of it was gone because of greed and carelessness. Around this time, a new character entered the picture. Mark, a financial advisor I was referred to through a mutual friend. Mark was sharp, no nonsense, and had a knack for untangling financial messes. He helped me lock down the remaining funds and set up additional safeguards. He even suggested filing a civil lawsuit against Rachel, though I wasn't sure I had the energy for another legal battle. While all this was happening, Sarah decided it was the perfect time to stir up more trouble. She started spreading rumors to Emma and Alex that I'd lost their college money through bad investments. Emma, being the more sensitive of the two, started pulling away from me. Alex, meanwhile, became angrier and more defiant. It felt like I was constantly playing defense, trying to protect not just the kids' futures but my relationship with them as well. One night, Alex confronted me. "Why didn't you tell us about the money?" he demanded. "Mom said you've been hiding stuff from us." I was floored. I explained everything, the settlement, the inheritance, the theft, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Sarah had done her damage. To make matters worse, Rachel resurfaced a few months later, this time trying to sue me for defamation because of the fraud charges. It was a baseless claim, but the stress of dealing with it was almost too much to bear. Mark, bless his heart, helped me navigate the legal side of things, but it felt like I was constantly fighting a losing battle. Through all of this, Lauren remained my rock. She reminded me why I was doing all this, why I fought so hard to give Emma and Alex the future they deserved. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The theft, the lawsuits, the rumors, it all felt like the build-up to something bigger. And then it happened. One afternoon, I received a call from the school. Emma had collapsed during a track meet and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said it was stress-related, a combination of dehydration, overexertion, and emotional strain. Sitting by her bedside, holding her hand as she slept, I realized how much this chaos had taken a toll on all of us. The financial battles were far from over, but in that moment, I made a promise to myself. No matter what it took, I would protect my kids, not just their futures, but their peace of mind. I don't usually keep tabs on Sarah's life, but some things have a way of finding you, whether you want them to or not. After we divorced, Sarah moved on quickly, too quickly, if you ask me. It wasn't long before she met Tom. He seemed harmless enough at first, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Tom was the type of guy who could charm a room when he needed to, but beneath the surface, he had a streak of arrogance and impulsiveness. Sarah, ever the opportunist, latched onto him as her ticket to a better life. They got married within a year of meeting. I didn't know much about him at the time, except that he had a teenage stepdaughter, Lily, from a previous relationship and was also caring for his nephew, Ryan, after some family tragedy I didn't dig into. Soon after tying the knot, Sarah and Tom had 2 kids of their own, Amelia and Jake. That made 4 kids in total under one roof. To say they were stretched thin would be an understatement. It wasn't long before I started hearing whispers about their financial troubles. At first, it was little things. Emma mentioned that her mom had to cancel a planned vacation because money was tight. Then Alex let it slip that Sarah and Tom had been arguing a lot about bills. I tried to stay out of it. As much as I wanted to swoop in and fix everything for my kids, this wasn't my problem to solve. Sarah had made her choices, and she needed to live with them. Things escalated when Tom's business started to crumble. He owned a small contracting company, which had been doing well enough when they first got married. But between rising costs and a couple of bad investments, it began hemorrhaging money. To make matters worse, Tom had a bad habit of living beyond his means. He drove a brand new truck, insisted on keeping up with the latest gadgets, and had a weakness for gambling. Sarah, ever the spender herself, didn't exactly help the situation. I remember one particularly awkward moment when Emma came home from her mom's house visibly upset. "Dad, do we have to go to Mom's this weekend?" she asked out of the blue. I was taken aback. "What's going on?" I asked. "Nothing. It's just, things are weird over there. Mom and Tom are always yelling, and Lily keeps locking herself in her room. Lily, Tom's stepdaughter, was a quiet, studious girl who always seemed out of place in the chaos of their household. From what I could gather, she didn't get along with Sarah at all. Sarah, being Sarah, treated Lily like an outsider and made no effort to hide her favoritism for her own kids. It didn't surprise me that Lily preferred to keep to herself. Things came to a head when I got a call from Alex one night. He was at Sarah's house, and his voice was shaky. "Dad, can you come get me? It's crazy here." I didn't need to be asked twice. When I arrived, the scene was chaos. Tom was yelling at Ryan, his nephew, about some missing money, accusing him of stealing it to buy video games. Sarah was trying to calm Tom down, but her tone was sharp, almost like she was enjoying the drama. The younger kids, Amelia and Jake, were crying in the background, while Lily sat on the stairs with her arms crossed, looking like she wanted to disappear. I pulled Alex aside. "What's going on?" He hesitated before saying, "Ryan didn't take anything. Tom lost money gambling, but he's blaming Ryan because he doesn't want Mom to know." I clenched my jaw. This wasn't the first time I'd heard about Tom's gambling problem, but seeing it affect the kids like this made my blood boil. I wanted to storm in there and give Tom a piece of my mind, but I knew it wouldn't help. Instead, I quietly told Alex to grab his things and come home with me. Over the next few months, the situation at Sarah and Tom's house spiraled further out of control. Tom's business officially went under, leaving him scrambling to find work. Sarah, who hadn't held a steady job since before our divorce, started picking up part-time gigs to make ends meet. But with 4 kids to care for, it wasn't enough. They fell behind on their mortgage, their utilities were constantly being shut off, and the tension in their house became unbearable. Emma and Alex started spending more time at my place, which I didn't mind at all. But it wasn't just to escape the chaos at their mom's house. They were worried about their siblings. Emma, ever the caretaker, started bringing extra snacks from my pantry to give to Lily and Ryan. Alex would try to distract Amelia and Jake with games or movies whenever things got too heated. It broke my heart to see them stepping into roles they shouldn't have to take on. The breaking point came when Sarah called me one evening, sobbing. "John, I don't know what to do," she said. "Tom's been arrested." I almost dropped the phone. "What?" She explained that Tom had been caught writing bad checks to cover his gambling debts. He was facing charges for fraud and could be looking at jail time. I didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. On one hand, this was exactly the kind of mess I'd expected from him. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel bad for the kids. They didn't deserve any of this. Over the next few weeks, Sarah leaned on me more than she ever had before. She started asking for financial help, money for groceries, rent, the kids' school supplies. Part of me wanted to tell her to figure it out on her own. But every time I thought about Lily, Ryan, Amelia, and Jake, I couldn't say no. They didn't ask to be born into this chaos, and I wasn't about to let them suffer because of Sarah and Tom's bad decisions. I also began to notice how much Lily was struggling. She confided in Emma that she wanted to move out as soon as she turned 18, even if it meant couch surfing or taking on multiple jobs. Ryan, who was only 14 at the time, started acting out in school, skipping classes, getting into fights, and generally lashing out at anyone in authority. It was clear that the stress of their home life was taking a toll. One day, I got a call from the school principal. Ryan had been caught vandalizing school property and was facing suspension. When I went to pick him up, he broke down in the car. "I hate it there," he said through tears. "I hate Tom. I hate Sarah. I just want to live with my mom again, but she's gone." Ryan's mom had passed away a few years earlier, which is how he ended up with Tom in the first place. Hearing him say that made my chest ache. I wasn't his dad, but in that moment, I realized how much he needed someone to step up for him. Over time, I became more involved in their lives than I ever expected. I helped Ryan find a counselor, encouraged Lily to apply for college scholarships, and even started looking into legal options to get Amelia and Jake into a more stable environment. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't what I'd signed up for, but I couldn't stand by and watch these kids suffer. As for Sarah, she continued to spiral. She blamed everyone but herself for her problems. Tom, me, the economy, even the kids. But deep down, I think she knew she was in over her head. I'll never forget the day she showed up at my door, holding Amelia in one arm and Jake in the other, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I need help." I could see it coming from a mile away. Sarah had a way of framing her words when she wanted something, and after everything that had happened with Tom and their financial meltdown, I knew it was only a matter of time before she came to me. Still, I wasn't prepared for how brazen she'd be about it. The phone call came on a Thursday evening. I'd just finished dinner with Emma and Alex when my phone buzzed. Seeing Sarah's name on the screen made my stomach turn. I rarely heard from her unless it was about some new crisis. I sighed and picked up. "John," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it, Sarah?" I asked, already bracing myself. She launched into a long-winded explanation about how hard things had been for her since Tom's arrest, how the bills were piling up, how she was doing everything she could to make ends meet. I could feel the setup coming, but I let her talk. Finally, she got to the point. "I was thinking," she said, her tone shifting to one of entitlement, "since you're doing so well financially, maybe you could start paying child support." I almost laughed out loud. "Child support? For who?" "Emma and Alex are already provided for, and we split custody evenly." "No," she said quickly, "not just for them. For all the kids. You know, to help with the household expenses." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. "Are you serious right now? You want me to pay for Tom's kids? For your nephew?" "That's not my responsibility, Sarah." Her tone turned defensive. "They're siblings, John. They're part of the same family. Don't you think it's your duty to make sure they're okay?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "My duty is to Emma and Alex, and I've gone above and beyond to make sure they're taken care of. What you choose to do with your life, and who you choose to take in, is not my problem." She didn't like that answer. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "You're sitting on all that money you don't even need, while I'm struggling to put food on the table for your children and their siblings." I hung up the phone before I said something I'd regret, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. Sarah never let things go, especially when it came to money. Sure enough, she showed up at my house the next day, unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, arms crossed, with a look of determination on her face. Behind her was Lily, Tom's stepdaughter, looking uncomfortable but clearly dragged along for backup. "Can we talk?" Sarah asked, pushing past me into the house before I could say no. "Make it quick," I said, closing the door. Emma and Alex were upstairs, and I didn't want them overhearing this mess. She launched into the same speech she'd given over the phone, only this time with more theatrics. She talked about how much the kids were suffering, how unfair it was that I had money while they were barely scraping by. She even dragged Lily into it, asking her to tell me how hard things had been. Lily, to her credit, looked mortified. "I don't think this is my business," she muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Exactly," I said, cutting Sarah off. "It's not her business, and it's not mine either. I'm not responsible for fixing your mistakes." That's when Sarah played her trump card. "If you won't help with child support, maybe you could at least share some of the money you've set aside for Emma and Alex. They're all family, after all." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to take money out of my kids' college funds to pay for your other kids? Have you lost your mind?" "They're not just my kids, John," she snapped. "They're their brothers and sisters. Don't you care about keeping the family together?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Sarah, I care about Emma and Alex. That's where my responsibility begins and ends. If you're having trouble managing your finances, maybe you should focus on fixing that instead of trying to guilt me into bailing you out." The argument went on for what felt like an eternity. Sarah tried every tactic she could think of: guilt, anger, even tears. But I refused to budge. Eventually, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Lily shot me an apologetic look before following her. I thought that was the end of it, but Sarah wasn't done. A few days later, I received an email from her lawyer. She was trying to reopen the custody agreement, claiming that I wasn't contributing enough to the kids' expenses and demanding formal child support payments. The audacity of it left me speechless. I immediately forwarded the email to my lawyer, Mark. He was as baffled as I was. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You already share custody 50-50, and you've documented everything you've contributed. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." Still, I couldn't help but worry. Sarah had a way of twisting the truth to suit her narrative, and I knew she'd stop at nothing to get what she wanted. The court process was grueling. Sarah painted herself as a struggling single mom, conveniently leaving out the part where she had squandered her resources and allowed her household to fall apart. She even tried to claim that I was withholding funds from Emma and Alex, which was an outright lie. But Mark was thorough. He presented evidence of the college funds I'd set up, the expenses I'd covered over the years, and the times I'd stepped in to help when Sarah had dropped the ball. The judge saw through her act and dismissed her claims, ruling that no changes were necessary to our custody arrangement or financial responsibilities. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. The whole ordeal had taken a toll on everyone, especially Emma and Alex. They'd been dragged into the middle of a conflict they didn't ask for, forced to hear their mother badmouth me while I tried to shield them from the worst of it. Even after the case was closed, Sarah didn't let up. She started spreading rumors among mutual acquaintances, claiming that I was a deadbeat dad who refused to support his family. I tried not to let it get to me, but it was exhausting. No matter how much I did for my kids, it was never enough in her eyes. The final straw came when Sarah showed up at one of Emma's school events and caused a scene. She confronted me in front of other parents, accusing me of abandoning her other children and refusing to be a real father. I calmly told her to leave, but the damage was done. Emma was humiliated, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. After that, I made it clear to Sarah that I wanted no further contact with her outside of matters directly involving Emma and Alex. I blocked her number and instructed Mark to handle any future communication through legal channels. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it was the only way to protect my peace and my kids. Things started unraveling faster than I expected. Even after the custody case was closed and Sarah's demands for child support were thrown out, she didn't stop trying to interfere. This time, she shifted her focus to Emma and Alex, using them as pawns to get what she wanted. It started subtly, the way Sarah always operated. She had a knack for planting ideas in people's heads, making her manipulations seem like their own thoughts. One day, Emma came home looking unusually quiet. Normally, she'd retreat to her room to read or work on her homework, but this time, she lingered in the kitchen, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I could tell something was bothering her. "Everything okay, kiddo?" I asked, setting my coffee cup down. She hesitated, then said, "Mom was talking to me about my college fund." That caught my attention immediately. "What about it?" She said, "It's not fair that Alex and I have all this money saved when Amelia and Jake don't. She thinks I should share some of it with them." I felt my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady for Emma's sake. "And what do you think about that?" Emma shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know. I mean, they're my brother and sister too, right? Maybe it's the right thing to do." I knelt down so I could look her in the eyes. "Emma, that money is for your future. For college, for whatever you need to get a good start in life. Your mom and Tom are responsible for Amelia and Jake. It's not your job to fix their mistakes." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Sarah had done her damage, making Emma feel guilty for something that was never her responsibility. I reassured her as best I could, but I knew Sarah wasn't going to let this go. Meanwhile, Alex was dealing with a different kind of pressure. Tom, in his usual sleazy way, had started dropping hints about my financial situation whenever Alex was at their house. "Your dad must be loaded," he'd say casually. "Bet he could buy you whatever you wanted if he felt like it." At first, Alex didn't say anything to me about it, but I started noticing changes in his behavior. He became more withdrawn, snapping at me or Emma over little things. His grades, which had always been solid, started slipping. It wasn't until I got a call from his math teacher that I realized how bad things had gotten. "Mr. Bennett," the teacher said, "I wanted to let you know that Alex has been having some trouble in class. He seems distracted, and he's been turning in assignments late, or not at all." I thanked her for letting me know and sat Alex down that evening. "What's going on, buddy?" I asked gently. "Your teacher says you've been struggling in school." At first, he shrugged it off, but when I pressed, he finally admitted what had been bothering him. "It's Tom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He keeps saying stuff about you. About how you have all this money and how it's not fair that you don't give them more." My fists clenched under the table. What exactly is he saying? Alex hesitated, then muttered, "He says you're selfish, that you're hoarding all your money while they're struggling." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "Alex, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Tom is trying to get under your skin, and it's not okay. You don't have to listen to him, and you don't have to feel guilty about anything." But the damage had already been done. Between Sarah's manipulation of Emma and Tom's constant jabs at Alex, both kids were carrying a weight they shouldn't have to bear. It started affecting their relationships with each other, too. They'd always been close, but now they were arguing more. Emma accusing Alex of being too sensitive, and Alex snapping back that Emma was Mom's favorite. I decided it was time to intervene. I scheduled a meeting with their school counselor, a woman named Dr. Green who had a reputation for being kind but firm. She agreed to see both kids together, as well as individually, to help them work through their feelings. The first session was rough. Emma was defensive, insisting that she didn't see what the big deal was about sharing her money. Alex, on the other hand, was visibly angry, accusing Emma of siding with their mom. Dr. Green stepped in, guiding the conversation and helping them see how they were both being manipulated in different ways. It wasn't an overnight fix, but it was a start. Things took a turn for the worse when Sarah found out about the counseling. She showed up at my house, furious. "How dare you send my kids to therapy without telling me?" she demanded. "They're struggling because of what you and Tom have been doing," I shot back. "They needed someone to talk to." "They're fine," she insisted. "You're just trying to turn them against me." I laughed bitterly. "You're doing a fine job of that yourself." That was the last straw for Sarah. She doubled down on her efforts to sway the kids. She started guilt-tripping Emma even more, saying things like, "Don't you want to help your little brother and sister? They look up to you." She also told Alex that I was using the therapy to spy on her and Tom, which only made him more confused and upset. The breaking point came during a family event at Sarah's house. It was supposed to be a birthday party for Amelia, but it quickly turned into a disaster. Tom made another one of his passive-aggressive comments about my money, this time loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Must be nice to be John, sitting on a pile of cash while the rest of us struggle." Alex, who had been trying to keep his head down all evening, finally snapped. "You don't know anything about my dad," he shouted. "Stop talking about him like that." The room went silent. Sarah tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. Alex stormed out of the house, and I followed him. Emma, who had been unusually quiet all evening, burst into tears. That night, as I drove the kids home, I realized just how much this situation had escalated. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. Sarah and Tom were using Emma and Alex as pawns in their own twisted game, and it was tearing them apart. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding the kids' confidence. I spent more one-on-one time with each of them, reassuring them that they didn't have to carry the weight of their mother's problems. I also doubled down on therapy, even if Sarah hated the idea. Slowly but surely, things began to improve. Emma started standing up to Sarah, politely but firmly refusing to discuss her college fund. Alex, with the help of Dr. Green, learned how to ignore Tom's comments and focus on his own goals. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but I could see them growing stronger. As for Sarah and Tom, their household continued to crumble. The more they pushed, the more Emma and Alex pulled away. And while it hurt to see them go through so much at such a young age, I was proud of their resilience. They were learning that they didn't have to let other people's problems define them. By the end of the year, the dynamic had shifted. Sarah and Tom's manipulation tactics had lost their power, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. It was getting harder to stay civil with Sarah. For months, I've been trying to shield Emma and Alex from the fallout of her manipulation, but there was only so much I could do. The kids were caught in the crossfire, and every conversation I had with Sarah seemed to escalate into an argument. I had already told her countless times to stop pressuring Emma to share her college fund and to cut it out with the guilt trips and mind games. But Sarah being Sarah, she ignored every warning. One evening, After another incident, where Emma came home in tears, I decided enough was enough. I called Sarah and laid it out as plainly as I could. "This has to stop, Sarah," I said firmly. "You're putting too much pressure on the kids, and it's affecting their mental health. If you don't back off, I'll have no choice but to take this to court." She scoffed. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, John. They're fine." "They're not fine," I shot back. "Emma's in therapy because of the guilt you've put on her, and Alex is constantly on edge because of the garbage Tom keeps saying about me. You're hurting them, Sarah, and I won't stand by and let it happen." Her tone turned icy. "You're not taking my kids away from me. Then stop giving me reasons to," I said. "I don't want this to turn into a legal battle, but if you don't start putting the kids' well-being first, I'll have no choice." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger. I hated the idea of dragging the kids through another court case, but it was clear that Sarah wasn't going to change unless she was forced to. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Sarah's lawyer. She was suing me for child support, claiming that she was the primary caregiver and that I wasn't contributing enough financially. The audacity of it left me speechless. Not only was this a blatant lie, our 50-50 custody arrangement was well documented, but it was also a transparent attempt to weaponize the legal system against me. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, Mark, who immediately got to work preparing our case. "Don't worry, John," he assured me. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on. The courts aren't going to entertain this nonsense." Still, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Going to court meant exposing Emma and Alex to more stress and drama, which was the last thing they needed. But I knew I couldn't let Sarah win. If she succeeded in her claim, it would set a precedent that could impact the kids' futures. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Sarah came in with her lawyer, a smug expression on her face. She argued that she was the primary caregiver because the kids spent more time at her house, conveniently omitting the fact that they often came to my place voluntarily to escape the chaos at hers. She also claimed that my financial situation gave me an unfair advantage, and that I should be obligated to share the wealth for the sake of family unity. Mark countered every point with hard evidence. He presented documentation of our custody agreement, records of the expenses I had covered over the years, and even statements from the kids' school counselor about the stress they had experienced due to Sarah and Tom's behavior. He also highlighted the fact that Sarah's other children were not my responsibility and that her financial struggles were a result of her own choices. The judge listened carefully to both sides before delivering the verdict. He ruled that the 50-50 custody arrangement was working well and that there was no basis for Sarah's claims. He emphasized that my financial obligations were limited to Emma and Alex, and that I was not required to support Sarah's other children. The relief I felt in that moment was indescribable. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She stood up and tried to argue with the judge, insisting that the kids needed more support and that I was being selfish. The judge cut her off, warning her that any further outbursts would result in a contempt charge. She sank back into her seat, glaring at me with a mixture of anger and defeat. When the hearing was over, I turned to Emma and Alex, who had been waiting anxiously outside the courtroom. "It's done," I told them. The court ruled in our favor. Emma let out a sigh of relief, and Alex managed a small smile. "Does this mean she'll leave us alone now?" he asked. "I hope so," I said. "But no matter what happens, we're going to get through it together." Over the next few weeks, things began to settle down. Sarah and Tom stopped trying to manipulate the kids, whether because of the court's decision or because they finally realized it wasn't working. I'll never know. Emma and Alex started to relax, and I could see the weight lifting off their shoulders. Emma threw herself into her studies, excelling in her AP classes and making plans for college. Alex, with the help of his therapist, began rebuilding his confidence and even joined the school soccer team. As for me, I focused on securing their future. I met with Mark to review the kids' college funds and made adjustments to ensure they were protected from any future interference. I also took steps to strengthen my relationship with Emma and Alex, spending quality time with them and letting them know how proud I was of their resilience. Looking back, I'm amazed at how far we've come. The road wasn't easy, and there were moments when I felt like giving up. But seeing Emma and Alex thriving now makes it all worth it. They're stronger than I ever could have imagined, and I know they'll go on to do great things. As for Sarah and Tom, I've heard through the grapevine that their financial situation hasn't improved. But that's no longer my concern. My focus is on my kids and ensuring that they have the tools and support they need to succeed. For the first time in years, I feel a sense of peace. We've weathered the storm, and we've come out stronger on the other side. Whatever challenges lie ahead, I know we'll face them together.